MPs may be back on Parliament Hill, but many of them have their sights set on the fall federal election. Today, as communities across 3 provinces grapple with rising floodwaters, politicians traded jabs on climate change. The Liberals are asking Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, where is your plan to cut emissions? And Scheer is claiming the Liberals lack a, quote, real plan. David McLaughlin is a former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and currently is the Director of Climate Change with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. He joins me in studio for a reality check. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Vash.
So we thought that we would do it a little bit differently today. We'll take some of the clips because there has been so much political back and forth on this, just from the past 12 hours, and sort of check each of them as we play them. So we're going to start off with a clip from Catherine McKenna today. Let's play that one.
What happened this weekend? Not surprisingly, Mr. Scheer said he would have a plan to offer a plan. And why are we waiting now? Because we now know Mr. Scheer is developing that plan with oil lobbyists, that he had a secret meeting discussing how to do less on climate change, how to fight our government.
So first things first, I'll just sort of explain to our viewers context around that. The first thing is that Catherine McKenna and Bill Morneau, the Finance Minister and the Environment Minister, held a press conference this morning saying it's been 1 year since Andrew Scheer first said we will have a plan to tackle climate change, and that plan has yet to be released. The second portion of that is based on some reporting from the first initiated by the Globe and Mail last week that reported that Andrew Scheer attended and gave a keynote address to a meeting of oil execs from sort of, I guess, smaller to mid-level oil companies, as well as CAP and some other players who were there. Gary Marr, we interviewed him last week, and that obviously led to the way that it was framed by Catherine McKenna. What do you think of what she said?
I think Mr. Scheer walked into it. The optics aren't great for Mr. Scheer and the Conservatives to be held up to the public as saying, guess what, you know, your climate plan is being written by folks who actually don't want to have a climate plan, meaning the oil and gas industry. That's not entirely correct, of course, but that's the dynamic that I think Mr. Scheer has allowed himself to get into, because it has been a year since he said he would have a climate plan. So there's a vacuum there. There's a political vacuum, there's a policy vacuum, and the Liberals and Ms. McKenna in this instance are all too happy to insert themselves in it and try to frame it against Mr. Scheer and the Conservatives.
And let me just pick up on one thing that you said. It's not entirely true that the oil, I mean, the industry as a whole, we were just saying in the break, it's not a monolith. There are varying opinions on what kind of climate policy should be pursued. There are some companies, for example, and we've talked to Jason Kenney about this, that are in support of it. Yeah, bigger companies.
Bigger companies, absolutely. Yeah, the oil and gas sector is not monolithic or homogenous on this. Some of the bigger companies recognize very much that this is a real policy threat. This is a real environmental threat to their business, and they are in the fossil fuel exploration and exploitation business. And guess what? Investors are raising questions about it. The whole, market base for fossil fuels is potentially on the decline. So, yeah, they're thinking about where this takes them. So, yeah, there's some folks in the sector that believe that climate change is real and want to do something about it and say, okay, yeah, actually carbon pricing is a good tool, and others say, no, wait a second, let's just keep producing where we are. So it's not. I think
it could also depend on what you can, as the size of the company, bear as a burden.
Sure, absolutely. But you know, the reality is for these companies is that if they don't embrace this in some fashion, at least get ahead of this, there's a real risk that they will be on the other side of it, where investors and the world markets will just shift on them, and they will find themselves on the short end of the stick.
Okay, and Mr. Scheer responded later today to the sort of call out from the Liberals for not releasing a plan yet. Here's what he had to say.
And I was there yesterday, and people were talking exactly about that, about the need for a real plan to tackle CO2 emissions here in Canada. And I highlighted the fact, and I will again today, that all the more reason why we need a real plan, not an ineffective carbon tax that has been shown not to reduce emissions, that even the government's own documents admit won't reach their own targets. That will just raise the cost of living for Canadians without ensuring that Canada does its part to reduce global CO2 emissions.
There's 2 parts of that I want to check up on, but the last one especially, where he's essentially, which we've heard from his party and a number of other Conservative parties, that this isn't the best way to do it. What's your response to that?
That's been the consistent Conservative message ever since the two Stephens, Stephen Harper and Stéphane Dion, if you will, in the 2008 election. So nothing has changed on that front. And the view of the expert view of most folks that have been in the business looking how to reduce emissions is that a carbon pricing whether it's a carbon tax or a cap and trade system, is the most cost-effective way to do it. If it's done the right way, if it goes across the economy, you let the market work, if you will. Mother Nature meets Father Greed in the market, and you find a good way, a non-governmental intervention way to make this work. The Conservatives are not having any part of that, and so in that sense, Mr. Scheer is quite consistent for the message that he's been trying to send, which is, look, I'm against the carbon tax, and there's got to be a better way to do it. Now, he is setting himself up, of course, to have have people ask him, what is that better way? So there's still part of the sentence that he has to finish. But in the meantime, he is trying to say, look, no carbon tax from us. And by the way, the Liberal plan for carbon tax actually won't get us to the Paris targets that the Liberals have said that they want to hit.
What about that criticism?
Well, I think that's valid. Right now, the Paris targets are a big stretch for this country. The Government of Canada's plan, which is really an amalgam of provincial plans, the federal measures, a carbon price in certain provinces, clean fuel standard, methane reductions, altogether, they still fall short of what the Paris target would be, and so there's still a gap for other policy measures to come in. And this provides an opening, a political opening, for the Conservatives to say, hey, look, see, even the Liberals can't make it with their carbon tax, and they're of course silent on the other measures. So it's not a bad political way for the Conservatives to frame the Liberals as being ineffective, and hope that hopefully then for the Conservatives, voters will respond and say, okay, well, then it isn't that effective, then maybe I'll look at what you guys have in mind. What do you have in mind?
The first part of that was an answer where he was asked whether he, and I don't have the exact wording, but essentially the link between climate change and the flooding that we're seeing. And his answer was, he didn't specifically say himself that he believed that, but that he had heard many people draw that link, and that's what he was saying there.
Well, that's really the Conservatives' Achilles heel on this. Until the Conservative Party of Canada actually comes out and explicitly says climate change is real, it's being caused by anthropogenic human emissions, by industrial emissions, including the fossil fuel sector. Until they say that, they run a real risk of voters saying, you guys actually don't get it, don't believe it, and don't care about it. And therefore, your plan, whatever you actually have, really won't do anything about it. For the Liberals, this is gold. This is political gold, because they're able to say, you may not like a carbon tax, but we should be doing something. The Conservatives, they don't even believe in it. They don't actually even care about it. And with younger voters, who do care about it, millennial voters and second-time voters from the last time, in their late 20s and in their 30s, with more female voters, in fact, actually evidence shows caring more about this. There's a gender gap often with Conservative votes and between male and female voters. Like, the Conservatives are leaving votes on the table potentially by not embracing the issue, and it just leaves them open for that kind of charge.
Okay, one more clip. This is Finance Minister Bill Morneau defending his plan, defending the government's plan. Let's take a listen.
Experts around the world, anybody who's looked closely at this, the overwhelming majority realize that putting a price on pollution is the way to get at this. So we are moving forward, as Catherine has just said, with our approach. But importantly, we're giving every single dollar from that price on pollution back to Canadians.
So this is the idea about the rebate that has been also a lot of political fodder. So we know for now that money will be refunded on your tax refund. Talk a bit about the economics of that.
Well, the PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, has actually confirmed that the government's numbers are correct. The economics of it are actually they're political economics, if you will. It's a political economy question. The bet is that people will, in fact, buy into this concept of a carbon tax more readily if they receive some kind of rebate back. And in fact, if they don't buy it with a rebate, it's very unlikely they'll ever buy, carbon tax. This is a big policy shift or policy debate that is actually going to be happening in the campaign. But the economics of it are that if you have a carbon price, then people will respond to the price signal. They'll say, look, I don't want to pay that, so I'll reduce my emissions. If you're a business, I'll invest in energy efficiency. I'll invest in new technologies, because there's got to be a better way to do this, because I really want to save money. It's classic. It's the market price signal.
What about the argument that it will not? If I know the money's coming back, it's not going to incentivize my behavior.
Well, it depends if you want if you're satisfied or want just that amount of money, or you want more. actually, because if you're getting a rebate of, say, $100, and in fact you say to yourself, look, if I actually change some of my energy habits, I could stretch that to 120 or 130 or 150. So it's the beginning of that price signal. And of course, for the Liberal government, that signal rises each year. So after a while, it's not year one that really matters, it's year 2 and year 3 as you get this kind of behavioral change. But an important factor as well is that carbon pricing, or carbon tax in this case, is not the only way to reduce emissions. So Mr. Morneau is obviously pushing his particular measure, but there are in fact other ways, and those are in fact in the government's agenda. As we talked, clean fuel regulations, fuel efficiency standards for vehicles and that. It's a question of the packaging of them all together. So
what about the price itself? Because there's been a lot of, the idea that it's going to have to go up quite a bit in order to achieve what it sets out to achieve.
Yeah. The higher the price, no question, the more emission reductions you get. But there is a political cost and there's a societal cost. It's not clear that Canadians are ready to pay even this modest amount. We'll see. That's what we're going to have an election about. But carrying that price up further and further, there's a big risk politically, but there's also going to be an economic risk. If you get the price too high, you get companies reacting the wrong way, and you get de-investment, you get carbon leakage and other things. So it's finding that right kind of balance. Government has said, look, we'll go up to $50 and then we'll see. Well, I guess we're going to see in the fall with an election.
We shall. Thank you. Thanks so much to David McLaughlin.
Pleasure.